Hello everyone, my name is Adrian. I've been working on this project for more than 6 months. I do not have the sculpture anymore, but I did film the process of making it, and I'm happy I can finally share it with you. This sculpture was the first commission sculpt I have ever made. Because of this, I don't have any footage of making the armature. I went back and forth with the client, who is the game master in the Dungeons and Dragons campaign I play in, to get the position right. Because after I start sculpting, it would have been very difficult to make any changes. Another added difficulty was that the dragon was supposed to fit in a glass display box that I didn't have at hand. I had the measurements, but I didn't measure the box myself. Maybe I'm paranoid, but this made me really anxious. I was going to spend an ungodly amount of time on this sculpture, and I was losing sleep thinking about what I would do if it wouldn't fit. One measure I took is that I made a wooden frame with the dimensions that were given to me. I also marked down the placement of the dragon inside this frame, and during sculpting I constantly checked if it still fitted inside the frame. To find out what features I should definitely incorporate in this dragon, I've watched the episode on Blue Dragons by Mr. Rex over a dozen times while sculpting, and it definitely helped out a lot. He goes into great details on a lot of features that I put into this piece. I use his videos for a lot of my projects, and also for when I need to run a game of Dungeons and Dragons myself. Check out the link in the description to watch the specific video I used. After I had bulked up all of the muscles, I focused my attention on the dragon's underside. Before starting on all of the scales on its back, I wanted to get the dragon's belly done so that I wouldn't mess up any of the details on top. I used a thin ballpoint tool to scratch the outlines of the belly scales and to create some texture. Using some isopropyl alcohol, I smoothed it out. And then it was time to work on the top side of this beast. I tried out a few different styles for the scales, and this crescent-shaped style was the one I liked best. I placed a curved piece of clay, blended it into the body, scratched in some lines, and smoothed it with alcohol. This was immensely time consuming, but I was hoping this style would look amazing once painted. Just imagine how the texture will take washes and dry brushing. So I decided to stick with it and plow through. I did get this nice 10-second stop motion sequence out of it. After what felt like an eternity, I quickly baked it to save my progress. If you know the feeling of your Game Boy running out of batteries after playing 4 hours of Pokemon, I wanted to prevent that. Anyway, I started working on the head. I added a lot of spikes and I gave them a bit of texture to make them blend in with the scales. Here is another shot of me adding detail to the head. I think this needle tool is my favorite sculpting tool so far. It's definitely the MVP during this project. It is an old needle that was used for leather stitching. I also made some holes for the teeth. I always like to make the holes first, then bake it and make the teeth out of green stuff. Like that there's a clear line between the gums and the teeth, and you have some extra surface for the green stuff to adhere to. And then it was time to tackle the wings of this monster. I flattened out a piece of clay and cut it roughly into the shape of the webbing. I then put it in place, blended it onto the armature and shaped the webbing into a nice curve. With a fine ballpoint tool I added some striation. I sculpted these wings live on Instagram, which was new for me, but it was a lot of fun. I think I will be trying to do more live streams in the future, so check out the link to my Instagram page in the description. At this point, almost the entire dragon was finished, so I baked it again and started working on the base. It was such a hassle to sculpt the rocks underneath the dragon Next time I'm doing a similar sculpt, I will definitely try and sculpt it in several parts. I tried to go for a sort of slate type rock jutting out of the ground. I found that roughly sculpting in parallel lines and blending them with alcohol worked out great for this. Something that every dragon needs is a big hoard. I tried to come up with several ways to sculpt this, but I couldn't think of anything that would look good without me having to cut individual coins. So I ordered a small resin kit with treasure bits. Because the kit was a bit small, I made a mold and cast a couple of copies. I made sure to not put the same pieces of the kit next to each other, because two identical piles of gold would be very weird. In between the gold piles, I added a sandy texture. I used PVA glue, fine sand, isopropyl alcohol, and to hold it in place, a layer of thinned down PVA glue. The isopropyl alcohol is important because it makes the thin PVA creep in between the grains of sand. Otherwise, the glue will just bead up on top of the sand. And with that, I was done with sculpting. Next step, painting. It felt really daunting to me to paint this big sculpture only using brushes. It seemed like painting this piece with an airbrush would be the best solution. I had never used one before though, but I decided to bite the bullet and I bought my very first airbrush. If you've seen my previous video, check it out here, you might be saying, you used an airbrush in that last video. Are you lying to me? Well, yes. I did use an airbrush in my latest video, but this project was so huge, I basically did several other projects in between. Also, nobody said my videos are uploaded chronologically. Anyway, I experimented with some blue gradients on the dragon. I tried to make the parts that would receive more light a lighter shade of blue. This will draw the focus towards the head and shoulders of the dragon, and it creates a more realistic sense of shape. I think it worked out great, but I'm curious to hear what you think. Let me know in the comments. Airbrushing for the first time was definitely not easy, so I didn't use a lot of the footage in this video. I'm very happy with where I ended up, but the process was messy, full of little mistakes, clogged nozzles and other mishaps. I don't feel like I'm the person to explain you how to airbrush, but what helped me a lot was the videos by not just Meka. He has an amazing series on how to use an airbrush. I would check this out if you want to learn more. After that, I touched up some of the overspray to end up with this as the base coat. I was very surprised with how fine I could spray with the airbrush. For example, I could spray between the claws with almost no overspray. This airbrush is a major addition to my tool chest for sure. After base coating, I went ahead with washes. I was looking forward to this step a lot because I was very curious to find out how the scales would look after being washed. I decided to use oil washes because I figured the longer drying time would be beneficial seeing the scale of the sculpture. Also, don't worry about the bandage around my wrist. I just had a reminder that I'm getting too old for skateboarding. For the webbing of the wings, I used several brown oil washes. I used darker tones on the places where I wanted more shade. Because I'm using oil washes, it was very easy to blend them together to create smooth transitions. I used the same colors on all of the lower surfaces of the dragon. For the scales, I used a dark blue oil wash. This wash was a little bit too thick, but with a dry brush I could remove it from the higher surfaces. As you can see, this wash gave a lot of depth to the scales, and as you can imagine, I was very happy with this. Still, I wanted to make the scales even more defined, so I did an even darker selective wash of each scale, focusing on the lower parts of the scales. After this wash had dried, I applied several layers of light blue dry brushing. The parts of the dragon that catch the most light received the most layers of dry brushing. Both the dry brushing and the oil washes worked amazing on the scales, and I already forgot how much I struggled sculpting them. It was more than worth it in the end. The final steps were all of the details. All of the bone-colored parts were painted and washed. The gold piles were painted with gold paint and washed as well, and I painted all of the details of the face. Unfortunately, all of the footage of the face was out of focus, so I couldn't use it. I also glazed all of the skin parts between the scales with a purple. I felt like that there was too much blue, and this purple made the scales stand out more. Finally, I painted the edges of the base black and called it done. Seeing I made this project as a commission for my dungeon master, I couldn't help but feeling an impending sense of doom throughout this project. But I'm sure it'll be fine, right? I mean, it'll be fine. Just to be sure, I added a little message underneath the sculpture. And finally, it was time for the final test to see if the dragon fits in the glass display box. Anyway, this immense project was an amazing experience. Working on a larger scale like this really opened up a lot of possibilities to add details. Of course, it also meant that it took me over half a year to finish it, but it was well worth it in the end. Please let me know in the comments what you think about it. If you like this video, please leave a like and subscribe if you want to see more of these kind of things. Also, share it with your friends, that would help out a lot. Another thing, I mentioned my Instagram page. I share a lot of in-progress pictures on there. So check out the link in the description to follow me on Instagram as well. Thank you so much for watching, and see you next time. Goodbye.